Hi everybody, me again on a beautiful day, more really of a continuation of a beautiful day, out riding with my wife. We're riding on Highway 205, and I don't think we're going to catch him. There's another guy on a Harley up in front of us, just turned on by, but not really interested in really catching up to him. We're going to ride around here and just enjoy the scenery. But I've mentioned before in some of my vlogs that my mother and father, when I was living at home and going to high school, wouldn't allow me to have a motorcycle. I couldn't have a dirt bike, couldn't do anything. I did have a mini bike, but mostly I just had a go-kart, and had a great time in the neighborhood with that. But always wanted a motorcycle. Couldn't get one until I went off to school. Well, and I drove my dad's cars. I drove Jeep. I drove, my dad had a really smoking Chevrolet station wagon. It was an Impala, and it had a 327 with a 4-barrel carburetor on it and a 2-speed automatic transmission. That thing would scream. And I'll tell you what, it was so funny. It was the fastest car he ever bought, and it was a station wagon. Everything else he bought was pretty slow. But we used to go out on the highway and pull up beside somebody. We'd be running 70 and drop that bad boy down into first and stomp it, and it would spin the tires. In first at 70, and I'm not talking about back scratching. I mean, it spun the tires, and that was so cool. We'd ride around with the air conditioning on, with our arms and legs hanging out to all the windows, you know, just like kids do. That was fun. But I want to tell you about my first car. I worked since I was 16 during the summers, and it saved up my money, and I had a good bit of cash. And my father agreed to pitch in on it because I was going to be going off to college in a different city, and was going to need something to drive, and he thought I ought to have something of my own. So I took my money and part of his money, and on the advice of a good friend and really somebody in the family, I bought a 1971 Datsun. Yeah, that's right, Datsun. That's before it was ever Nissan. A Datsun 510 sedan, 2-door. Now this thing was as orange can be. I wanted red, but my friend had a red one, and he said they faded real bad. He said it'd be pink in no time, so I decided I would go with orange, because I figured faded orange was better than faded red anywhere. So went and got this thing. Let me tell you a little bit about it. 1600 cc's, so not a really big giant motor. 4-speed transmission was standard. I paid a little extra and had them install a tachometer, the factory tachometer, in the dashboard. They said that was the first time they'd ever done that on a Datsun 510. I got mag wheels, Michelin tires, had the standard radio. It didn't have air conditioning. It didn't have power brakes. It didn't have power steering. It didn't need any of that. It was just a little 2-door. Now, I could carry 4 of my friends, you know, I could carry me and 4 friends if they were real friendly, 3 if they weren't. But I used to go and pick everybody up at school. Now, I forgot to mention one little thing about Datsun, and it's the reason that I bought the car. At the time that I bought it, I was into parking lot racing, you know, slalom racing. People call them gymkhanas, things like that. And I was really big into that, and I really loved it. And I'd been using a friend's car to drive it. And it's where you drive in the cones, you know, and in a parking lot, and you do it for time. You only race by yourself. You're not racing with anybody. You're racing against the clock. I really love to do that. Well, at the time that I bought my car, there was a guy in California named Bob Sharp. And Bob Sharp was taking Datsun 510s just like mine and turning them into race cars. And he was working with Datsun to pioneer these parts that Datsun itself was going to sell. And he was winning everything. He put 3 cars in a race, SCCA car race. Now this is the full race. This is where you're racing against people. And in their class, they'd finish 1, 2, 3 every time. They were amazing. Well, The one extra thing that I got from my car, I got out of the Datsun racing catalog, was the Datsun racing suspension. And it was surprisingly affordable, and the dealership put it on for me. And it lowered the car down. If I had 4 inches of ground clearance, I'd be real surprised. I don't know that I actually did. It stiffened up the suspension and made that thing go around a corner like you would not believe it. And I drove that thing everywhere. I drove it to school, of course, but I drove it all over, drove my friends. There was a little road, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, there was a road where I used to go pick up one of my friends, and every morning we would go down through there, and the way the intersection was made, it was kind of, I had a little bump in the middle of the intersection. And we would get air with all 4 wheels every morning going down that road. And it was just cool. It was a super car. Now, the emission control laws had just been passed, and you couldn't do anything to the emissions. If you did, the car wouldn't pass the inspection, and you couldn't drive it on the street. So I had to leave. All they had on there was this smog pump. It looks just like your alternator that you have on your car right now. And it had an extra belt. It sapped a lot of horsepower, but you know, that's okay. I didn't want to rock the boat. Didn't want to have a car I couldn't drive on the street. And associate along with that, the parking lot racing that I was doing, they wouldn't let you modify that anyway and still stay in your stock class, or really let you run them at all. But because I wasn't in the stock class with that suspension, but that car would go great. But the funny thing was, people wanted to race me all the time. My car just looked cool, and especially down the road when I got a set of Goodyear racing tires and some other rims, and I actually had to cut out the upper part of the fender wells and put in some flared fenders. Now you talk about something that looks sweet. Gosh, that thing was bright orange with brilliant white fender flares on this thing. And it was slick. And like I said, it would go like crazy. And I didn't have a lot of sense back then, and I'm not so sure I do now, but here's how a race would go. Somebody pull up beside me at a stoplight, and I know I don't have any horsepower. I can't outrun anything as far as off the line. And so what I would do is I would, light would turn, and the Camaro, usually it was a Camaro or a Firebird or something like that, wanted to race me, knowing that they could smoke me. And they would take off in a cloud of smoke, and they'd get, 8 or 9, 10 car lengths ahead of me before we get very far down the road. But then is when my craziness kicked in, because I knew that I could out-corner them easily. And so we would race down to that first big corner, that first big turn where they had to hammer on the brakes so that they could go around the corner, and I'd go by them 80 miles an hour, other lane, and just waving and smiling as I went by. And it would blow their minds. That was the end of the race right there, buddy. They never wouldn't even try to catch up to me again, because they knew they were racing with a crazy guy. But just want to tell you about it. It was a fantastic little car that I had. I'd love to still have it. I actually had it up until, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago. Maybe not that long ago. But it wasn't running. I had made the car into a full-blown race car, and was going to get my competition license to race it in the SCCA sports car racing, and where I could get out on the track with other cars. And I got it all fixed up, and a big race came up, and one of my friends asked if they could. He had, she had her competition license, and she said, "Can I drive your car in the race?" And I said, it was an endurance race. It was a 2-hour race, and I said sure. And we took it up there to I believe it was might have been Watkins Glen. I'm not sure exactly where that place was. It was up in New York somewhere. And took the car up there and trailered it all the way and got it in the race. And doggone if we didn't finish second in our class. I think we'd have done better, but it started overheating within the first half hour. I think we finally determined it had blown a head gasket. She was running it so hard. And what I had to do was, there's a little rubber hose on the right beside the radiator cap, and I ran that hose, unhooked it, and ran it back along the edge of the hood where I could see the end of it. And I would, when she would go by me by pit straight, I would get down to where I could get that hose backlighted against the sky, and I could, or excuse me, a dark surface, and I could see where the steam was coming out. And when the steam would be coming out, the next time around I would give her the flag to come in, and that way she never got it, you know, never ran it out of water, because she could go 2 laps with it steaming pretty good. And so she'd come in every, I don't know, maybe every 5 or 6 laps she had to come in, and we'd put water in it. But oddly enough, in a 2-hour race, you'd be amazed how many full-blown race cars don't make it. You know, they're used to running a lot shorter than that. But we had a lot of fun with it. It was a great car, like I said. Sold it to a guy who I believe sold it to a guy who was restoring a 510 and was going to use the body panels off of mine, because after all the years, they were still pretty good. And at that time, Datsuns, they weren't using very good sheet metal, and it was rotting out on most of the cars pretty quick. Oh well, that was my first car. If you've got a interesting first car that you want to talk about, please do. And please comment. Please share it with us. And alright guys, well, oh, here comes something interesting. I said, oh yeah, I see a lot of these out here, a whole bunch of them. He's out having fun. Alright guys, well, take care, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.